Alright, this is part 4 of the America series. This is going to be about the Social Security Administration and the Social Security created trust, which shares the same name as you in all likelihood. Now, this is something that a lot of people struggle with wrapping their heads around because it's kind of a state of split personality disorder or something. That's what it appears to be, that each individual has two separate identities and they have been using the two simultaneously or acting in one when they thought they were acting in another. There are a lot of mosquitoes, so you'll have to pardon me. Anyhow, it is also something that apparently law enforcement officers are unable to wrap their minds around. So they don't seem to want to learn. So you're going to have to learn your rights, otherwise you do not have any rights. You need to learn the state of the law, and this is really, it's an important thing to do. Because if you look at the state of the world, if you look at what appears to be the government overreach, how can you sleep with a clear conscience knowing that you're doing nothing about it, despite the fact that they're apparently going against the Constitution? Your children are going to inherit a world even worse than the one that you've inherited. And it's going to be your fault for not stepping up and doing your duty. And your duty is as simple as acts which could be considered civil disobedience, but which are not actually civil disobedience, because what you're doing is actually acting under the law. You're acting within the law, and the fact that a bunch of corporate mafia thugs don't recognize that has nothing to do with whether or not you are acting within the law. It's that they are felons and you are simply challenging the status quo as far as universal compliance with the corporate state. Now, some of these acts, I'll get into it more, but they can be as simple as what I'm doing. My first step is driving without registration plates, corporate state plates, driving without corporate state issued ID, and the Social Security card holder's identification. And basically, every time I get pulled over, just trying to explain the law to the officers, explain to them that if they detain me, they are the ones committing a felony, and I am acting within my rights, and that I can prosecute them within the full extent of the law. So, unfortunately, they don't seem to be learning from this even within the same department, and I think that it's just going to have to go through a criminal lawsuit in order for them to stop harassing me and perhaps understand the law. But I think that even then they will not understand the law, and they will simply go on harassing other citizens who have not shown that they are not weak and stupid enough to just bend over and comply with every demand, every unconstitutional demand of the corporate state. Now, let's get to the matter at hand, which is the Social Security Administration created trust. So, I've mentioned this in another video, but I want to condense it into this topic here. So if you look at the back of your Social Security card, it says this card belongs to the Social Security Administration, must be returned to us upon request. Okay, the Social Security Administration Act, I think I mentioned it before, but in that act it says, provide for the general welfare of the people, blah blah blah, all these good things, and then at the end it says, and to raise funds and for other purposes. So yeah, they have their nice humanitarian bullcrap that politicians put in bills, and then at the very end they leave it a blanket. We can do anything we want with this, and we can raise money and not use it for any of the stated purposes except for our purposes, or just to raise funds. It says it right there in the act, the original act which created the Social Security Administration. And I guess people just take it because they read the first part and ignore the not so fine print. Anyhow, this Social Security Administration is an entity controlled by the corporate state, the Corp US. Now, on that card, the fact that it says it belongs to the Social Security Administration means that if you have it, the only way you could obtain it is if you stole it, if it was lost and you found it, or if it was entrusted to you. You didn't steal it because they mailed it to you. You also didn't find it because they mailed it to you. You applied for it, or your parents applied for it, they mailed it to you, and then you signed it. Or you waited till the age of accountability and then you signed it. So you've accepted the terms of the contract. And the terms of the contract are the entity which they have put on your card, the all caps thing, it doesn't really matter. That the all caps thing does not differentiate the trust from you. What differentiates the trust is the fact that there's a social security number attached to it from you. So that name on the card with the number next to it, those two things paired signify the trust, because obviously that card was entrusted to you, as we've just ruled out the other two possibilities. And what that means is that the Social Security Administration is the trustee, or is the beneficiary. The SSA is the beneficiary because they own the trust. You are a citizen, as defined by the Constitution, as we went over in the Constitution video, and that does not change the fact that you are a citizen. What changes is that you accepted the terms of a contract and have accepted to serve the office of a trustee on behalf of the Social Security Administration, operating under your name attached to a Social Security number. So like I said, this is kind of hard to wrap your head around, but when you recognize that that card was entrusted to you and that that number is not your number, that number is to distinguish the trust, the name on that card, from any person of same or similar names. That's a Social Security Administration policy, right? So that means that every time that you identify what you think of as yourself with your Social Security number, you're not identifying yourself, you're identifying the Social Security Administration created trust. You're not acting as a citizen. If I go to the bank, I try to open a bank account, they say, even if you're not, they ask for your Social Security number, but they'll also ask for a driver's license, right? You had to have a Social Security number to get a driver's license. What if you provide a passport? You had to have a Social Security number to get a passport. So any secondary document that you used your Social Security number to receive, even if it doesn't have your Social Security number on it, that is initiating an interaction as the trust and not as a citizen. So your driver's license is not identification for yourself, it's identification for the trust. Your passport is identification for the trust, because the corporate state controls our immigration policies, because our government is, in effect, defunct. The rule of law is there, but we have no effective government, so they're not controlling our immigration policies. So it only makes sense that our government has immigration policies which have nothing to do with the interests of the American people. Right? So recognize that if you use that number, you're not identifying yourself. All right? So in a case of being pulled over by a police officer, he says license and registration, please. All right? If you say, all right, there's a lot of stuff on the internet about sovereign citizen. Okay? First of all, I think I mentioned this before also, but I don't believe that the term sovereign is appropriate, because sovereign is defined as the ultimate authority. On Team Law's website, it's defined as dominion, agency, and possession are the three elements of sovereignty. Okay, so in the first case, I'm not arrogant enough to call myself the ultimate authority, and I think that in the Constitution, it was understood that yes, the people as individuals are the ultimate authority, but they're not above each other. It's not like there's one ultimate authority, like a sovereign. So I just choose not to use it for that philosophical reason. And then the other reason, that is, you don't have dominion, then you don't have sovereignty. Okay, you can relinquish your sovereignty by relinquishing your dominion, or relinquishing your possession, or giving up your agency, which is a philosophical problem because you can't really give up your agency. It's a matter of circumstance. If you're incapacitated in a catatonic coma or something, then yeah, you have no agency, but you have no control over that. If you forfeit your agency, it was still your choice to forfeit your agency, and in that sense, you can't forfeit your agency. Anyhow, but agency is also directly related to leverage. So if you don't have resources or you don't have power, then you have less agency than someone who does have those things, such as the corporate state. Anyhow, citizen, cop pulls you over. He says, license and registration, please. You hand him your driver's license. You're initiating the interaction as the trust, and you're under all those corporate laws that you've contracted with as the trust. If you say, I have no such documents, or you say, I'm sorry, I'm a citizen, I don't understand, something like that, you identify yourself as a citizen, and when they say, do you have a driver's license, you say no. Because if you were to say, yes, I have a driver's license, one, you'd be lying, or two, you'd be identifying yourself as the trust. Because if you say yes, and you're not lying, I have a driver's license, you are speaking on behalf of the trust. Because the DMV cannot issue driver's licenses to citizens because you need to have a social security number in order to receive a driver's license. There's no exceptions. Also, the right to travel is a right, and the human rights which are protected by the Constitution are considered unalienable by the framers of the Constitution in the original context, which means they can't be forfeited by the holder of those rights, and they can't be taken from another party in the form of a lien. This unalienable lien, that's where it comes from. So that's the reason that the driver's license is not yours. So if you say yes, I have a driver's license, but you're trying to identify yourself as a citizen, then you're lying or you're misspeaking. So if you say no, I don't have a driver's license, even if there's one issued to your name, it wasn't issued to you, it was issued to the trust and not to you. So when a cop pulls you over, if you want to identify yourself as a citizen, you say, no, I don't have a driver's license. Now, this is a seemingly trivial matter, and a lot of people criticize. They say, like the cops that pulled me over the other day, they were like, why do you got to poke the bear when it doesn't need to be poked? Or you're trying to cause a confrontation. It's like, no, I'm not the one causing a confrontation because I'm just going about my business, acting within my rights, acting according to my constitutionally protected rights, and you are the one who is confronting me, coming up to me, acting under color of law. And this is important because the right to travel is protected because, sorry, the right to travel is protected because it's necessary for life, liberty, and the property. So how are you going to survive in today's paradigm, or even in the original paradigm of the United States? How can you survive if you can't travel to get from point A to point B and collect resources or something that you need or whatever? Liberty, because if it's a public road, it's owned by the public. It can't be owned by the state because the state can't own it for that purpose. The federal government can't own it for that purpose. It's owned by the public. You have the liberty to use that road unrestricted because it's owned by the public. So that's why it's an important issue, and it's really, I think, a good first step because, yes, they can act outside of their policies, like when they handcuffed me, but that's not typically the policy, because the first time they just wrote me a traffic violation under the Social Security Trust identification, which I told him was not correct, but he told me that he was going to arrest me if I didn't sign the paper, so I said information not correct on there and then just signed it. So the risks involved here are very low as long as you do not provoke them in any kind of violent way. All you have to do is speak to them, explain them what the law is, and they're going to write you traffic violations, which are going to get dismissed. All right, I'm not, and this is not legal advice. All right, I'm going to update after the things go through the courts and everything just to prove it. But other people have done this, so you can look at their anecdotal evidence. Anyhow, the risks involved are simply fines in the amount of like $150 per violation or something like that. So if you fuck it up, it's not that big of a deal. Whereas if you do something which I think is more of an issue, which I would much rather do, but I'm not trying to test the waters with both feet, as they say. What I would prefer to do is transfer the ownership of my land to my name as a citizen, distinguish that from being held by the trust, because the trust is the one who probably is seen to own it right now because they're the ones in contract with the corporate town and taxes and building codes and all that, right? So I would prefer to transfer ownership to myself and my tax obligations and my obligation to follow building code, and then just do what I want with my land without having to go through all the hullabaloo, jumping through hoops for the town and paying property taxes, which makes me no more than a renter of my property at that point. I would rather do that, but the process of securing chain of title in this particular property just is difficult because of the subdivisions, and also the risks involved is they could try to take your property by lien, and even if they're doing it unlawfully, it's going to take some time to litigate, and they might sell it to another person at that time, and it could be taken away from you, and they could do things to your property that they don't want if you're not prepared properly, so it's a much bigger risk. That's why I'm taking this driver's license issue as the perfect place to start. your civil disobedience, which is actually just knowing your rights and following them. But the knowledge of the difference between the trust and the citizen is key to all of your constitutional freedoms, because in every case when one of your constitutional freedoms is being taken away of, it is because it's not being taken away from you, it's being either contracted, or probably being contracted away from you via the Social Security Administration created trust under your name, and whatever contracts you've entered yourself into. For example, paying income tax, all right? You have entered that because you are employed through your Social Security number, which means that you're not employed. You're serving the office of the trustee, and the worker is the trust, and the employer has an employer ID number, so that employer is the trust, and therefore they are subject to income taxes. Income taxes are unconstitutional. And the fact that there was an amendment allowing the federal government to tax without apportionment, all that means that it was a corporate thing, because the government didn't have the authority in the first place to give itself that ability. It was clear in the Constitution that it was limited to tax with apportionment only, and they can't just give themselves that authority. So what they did was they wrote that amendment to make it seem like it's constitutional, and then they make people go through the Social Security Administration, and then they take their money and redistribute it to a bunch of state leeches who was like their biggest voting bloc. I mean, that. So in that case, yes, it's through the Social Security Administration. Anything else, like firearms? Like I said, they do it through controlling the manufacturers. If you secure firearms without going through these channels, buying and selling from a private citizen, it's considered private property. It's not under jurisdiction of the federal government. No, they might send an ATF agent in, or they might send the police in and confiscate your weapons, and then you're going to have to go through court to get them back, but you're going to win as long as you have evidence. Or mainly, I guess, that they don't have evidence that you purchased them through a FFL or whatever, which would make it through some contractual obligations. So, this country was won on the blood of some very noble and very brave patriots, some freedom-loving, liberty-loving individuals who really cared about the future generations who would inherit this country. And they paid the price, a lot of them in life, a lot of them in years of hardship and anguish, and they made some very concrete sacrifices for this country to exist and for us to have the freedoms that we have. And now there is no need for the same struggle to happen. That war has already been won and the blood has already been shed. We have our constitutional republic, which protects our human rights according to a philosophy of libertarianism and natural law. The fight today is much more docile and much more easy. So for you to say that you were unwilling to make that fight, if you were unwilling to go through the trouble of being harassed by police, unlawfully arrested, molested by them patting you down for weapons, taking away your civil liberties, which they've already taken away, but they just take them away further and they unlawfully arrest you, or take your property unlawfully, whatever. I mean, these things are very minor in the grand scheme of things, and what we have to gain from exercising our rights in defiance of the criminal policies of the corporate state is well worth these minuscule sacrifices that we need to make as individuals. And I don't think that it would really take much for people to wake up and realize what their constitutional freedoms are. Now, people have become very domesticated. People have become very complacent. So a lot of people are not going to be on board with this. But by the time you see on a daily basis people driving down the road without license plates, the word is going to get out. You just have to be sure that you understand what the law is, because these people that are doing sovereign citizen thing, a lot of them have no idea what the law is. And maybe they get lucky sometimes, But you can really get yourself into hot water if you don't understand the difference between the Social Security Administration created trust and you as a citizen. So, know which one is acting at which time, and that's all you have to do. There's no getting out of that contract. You just have to understand who you are and act accordingly.